So, is there a line a government just can't cross? Can a parliament, even one elected by the people, fundamentally change the supreme law of a nation? Today, we're diving deep into a landmark Indian case that put this very question to the ultimate test: Minerva Mills versus the Union of India.
And look, this isn't just some dusty old legal puzzle. This question, whether a government can alter the very soul of its constitution, it gets right to the heart of what democracy and the rule of law are all about. It's really a battle for who has the final say.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the power to amend laws, and a super important idea called the basic structure doctrine. Then, we'll see how a really controversial amendment put that whole doctrine on trial, leading to a pretty dramatic verdict. And finally, we'll unpack why this case still matters so much today.
Okay, first up, let's talk about the fundamental tension here. You see, any constitution has to be a living document, right? It needs to be able to adapt to changing times, but at the same time, it also has to protect timeless principles. And that creates this natural conflict between a government's power to make changes and the Constitution's job as a permanent safeguard.
At the absolute center of this battle are two key parts of the Indian Constitution. On one side, you've got your fundamental rights. These are the guaranteed freedoms, like your freedom of speech. On the other side, you have what are called directive principles. These are goals the state should try to achieve, like ensuring equal pay for equal work. But what happens when these two clash? What if achieving a social goal means you have to limit a fundamental freedom? That became the billion-dollar question.
All right, let's dive into our next section, which introduces the real hero of our story, the basic structure doctrine. This is the big legal idea that basically acts as the Constitution's unbreakable core.
So what is it exactly? Well, the basic structure doctrine says, yes, of course, Parliament has the power to amend the Constitution. But, and this is a huge but, it cannot change or destroy its most essential features. It can't mess with the core framework that makes the Constitution what it is in the first place.
Here's a great way to think about it. Picture the Constitution as a huge building. Parliament is kind of like the property manager. They're allowed to renovate the rooms, they can repaint, move some internal walls, update the furniture, but what they cannot do is take a wrecking ball to the building's foundation or knock down its main support beams. The core structure has to stay intact no matter what.
But every great principle eventually has to face its biggest test. And for the basic structure doctrine, that test came in the form of the very controversial 42nd Amendment to the Constitution. Now, this amendment was passed during a pretty intense period of national emergency, and it was a direct challenge. It basically said that government goals, those directive principles, would now have absolute supremacy over citizens' guaranteed fundamental rights. And it also tried to give Parliament unlimited, absolute power to amend the Constitution. And here's the kicker. It said no court could ever question any of those amendments.
This just created a massive constitutional crisis. I mean, think about it. If Parliament's power is truly unlimited and completely beyond the review of the courts, then is the Constitution still the highest law in the land? Or has Parliament basically put itself above the Constitution? That was the enormous question the Supreme Court had to answer.
And that brings us to the climax of our story, the Minerva Mills verdict. This is the moment the Supreme Court stepped into the ring to respond to the challenge that the 42nd Amendment threw down.
The year was 1980.
A truly pivotal moment in India's legal history had arrived. The case that would decide the fate of this entire constitutional struggle was Minerva Mills Limited versus the Union of India.
And the court's conclusion was captured in this one, simple, incredibly powerful line: the power to amend is not the power to destroy. That single sentence just affirmed it all. Parliament's authority has limits, and those limits are defined by the Constitution itself. So what was the final ruling? Well, the court struck down those two really controversial sections of the 42nd Amendment. It ruled that Parliament's power to amend is limited, and it absolutely cannot be used to destroy the Constitution's basic structure. And then, in a stroke of genius, the court said that the delicate balance, the harmony between fundamental rights and directive principles is itself a part of that basic structure, which means it can't be destroyed either.
So why are we talking about a case from 1980 today?
Well, because its legacy is absolutely profound, and it continues to shape Indian democracy as we know it.
If you take away just one single thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. The absolute crucial point established by Minerva Mills is that the Constitution is supreme, not Parliament. An elected government has to work within the framework of the Constitution. It doesn't get to stand above it.
And the legacy of this verdict is just immense. It established a vital check on government power, making sure no single group could become all-powerful. It built a protective wall around our fundamental rights, so they can't just be erased for the sake of a government policy. It preserved the core democratic framework of the country, and, so critically, it upheld the power of the courts, the principle of judicial review, to act as the ultimate guardian of the Constitution.
Which really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. The battle to define and defend a Constitution's core, it's never really over. The Minerva Mills case gave us a powerful shield, for sure, but it also raises this ongoing question for every single generation. Who protects the Constitution's basic structure today, and how do we do it?